Welcome. You are watching Meet the Candidates on BCTV. I'm your host, Olga Peters. And my guest today is Nader Hashim, who is the Democratic nominee for the Windham 4 district, which is Putney, Dummerston, and Westminster.
That's right.
Welcome, Nader. I'm so glad you can be here today.
Thank you for having me, Olga. Appreciate it.
So by day, your day job, like most potential lawmakers and current lawmakers, for you, you are a trooper with the Westminster Barracks.
Correct.
And I know that this job has given you quite the insight into a lot of parts of Vermont that many people may not see. But I'm wondering, since the primary, when you won the primary along with Mike Moricky back in August, between now and then and campaigning and knocking on doors, what has that taught you about Vermont that maybe you didn't know before?
What I've learned is that a lot of folks, they still have hope about the future. And it's really easy to become a bit cynical about the way things are going. But there is still a lot of hope out there. And people are also a lot more engaged, and they want to get involved. People who, 2 or 4 years ago were not involved in politics are now saying to themselves, I have to get involved. Let me figure out how I can help this campaign or help another campaign. So that's been the enlightening part about it.
Now, I seem to remember in past conversations you telling me that you've always had an interest in politics.
Correct.
What made you decide to run now?
There seemed to be a sense of urgency, almost, because of what's going on the federal level. There's no better time than the present to get involved. I mean, I think that people should always get involved, and I just felt that now was the right time. The stars were aligned, and it is difficult to run for office in Vermont because we have a citizen legislature, and it's much more easy to get involved in the legislature when you're retired. But when you're a single dad working full time, it's a bit more tricky. But after looking closely at the situation, the time seemed perfect, and so I took the step forward.
That's a really great point that you raised there. You're not the first person I've heard say, well, I got kids and I've got a job, right, and I don't know how I'd serve in the legislature. How are you balancing that, especially with a job that is essentially employed by the state? How are you balancing that?
Oh, it's been difficult, but it takes a lot of planning and support. You can't do it by yourself. You need the people who care about you and care about the mission that you have or the goals that you have to be there for you. You have to have good family support, and those are the things that really make a big difference. It's not something that you can do by yourself.
And how will you balance being a trooper and a lawmaker? Will you take like a leave of absence during the legislative session, or how's that going to work?
Yeah, that's the most difficult thing that I'm grappling with right now, actually. It's, so there's two paths that I could take. The first is remain with the Vermont State Police, and in which scenario I would take a leave of absence to serve as a legislator. This is a right that's guaranteed to all Vermonters. So if no matter where you work, if you win public office, that employer has to give you time off to go serve. And so, but there is a potential conflict of interest because I can't represent the same people who I police, and so the way to remedy that is transferring to another barracks, which would be Royalton, and that would put me far away from the district where I can do police work and not have to worry about usually policing my constituency, because not many folks from Putney find their way up to Randolph or anything like that. But, so it mitigates that risk. The second path would be resigning from the Vermont State Police and working either in another state job or a private job.
And of course, you right now don't have an opponent for the general election, but I suppose November is when a lot of that will be decided.
Correct. I still have plenty of time to decide it. The way, I don't like taking sudden risks or chances, and so I do have different routes planned out and different contingency plans in place. So there's time to decide, and it's nothing too urgent.
Now, once you arrive in Montpelier, What are some of your priorities once you get there?
My number one priority that's risen to the top over the last couple of weeks is private prisons. The news that's come out recently that we're sending Vermonters to Mississippi to a private prison is something that bothers me quite a bit. I believe that if somebody commits a crime in a state, that person is the responsibility of that state. And I think that mixing capitalism with incarceration is very dangerous and unethical. I think that is one of the reasons that the United States now has the highest incarceration rate in the world. And so if it was up to me, I would outlaw private prisons in general. So that's number one, is getting those folks who've been sent to Mississippi to a private prison where there's less transparency and there's less standards and less opportunity for rehabilitation. Get those folks back to Vermont. And another big issue in another arena is Act 46. Before I started the campaign, I knew that was going to be one of the biggest issues. I knew that every door I knocked on, people were probably going to ask me questions about Act 46. And recently I attended the Board of Education meeting in Chester. And prior to that meeting, I understood that the majority of people in my district are opposed to the merger. And they also want to sustain the alternative governance structure that Westminster already has in place.
Okay.
And so that going to the Board of Education meeting just reaffirmed that for me. So I think it's important to maintain our schools the way they are and look at the long view of how we can get more young folks to Vermont to get more enrollment in our schools. And I also think that legislators need to make sure we respect the people's voice. And there was a vote that clearly indicated the people are opposed to merging their schools in the Windham 4 district.
You raise a really interesting point about Act 46. It is a law that has been passed and it's on the books. How are you going to navigate that? Because you have your constituency saying one thing,
right,
but the law kind of saying something else. Talk about that balancing act.
I think one of the important things to look at is the implementation of Act 46, because the alternative governance structure is written as an opportunity for districts to take hold. But it almost seems like it was more so just lip service. It doesn't seem like it's being implemented the way it was written. So I think that's what we can look at more closely in January.
Now, I seem to remember that economic development was one of the things, or the economy in general, was one of the things that was important to you as a candidate, because you've seen, in Vermont, you've seen a lot of poverty, you've seen a lot of people who are struggling. Is that still important to you?
Oh yes, it is. The economic development piece, I mean, Vermont has generally had a slow economy, and I think that a lot of it has to do with population. Our retirement age population has been increasing, but the younger folks who want to get into business, the younger folks who want to buy homes and get things moving, those are the folks who I think need to be focused on in order to bolster an economy. I also think more opportunity for affordable housing is important for that, because how can you be expected to start a business if you can't pay your bills and can't afford a comfortable place to live and raise your family? Bandwidth or internet access is also very important. And it just reminds me of this time. I went to the Bunker Farm at the very start of the campaign, and one of the things I asked them is, as a business in this area, what is specifically an agricultural business, what is one of the most important things for you? And surprisingly, they said their internet connection. They need fast internet, and I was not expecting that from farmers, but it is what's needed.
And what about affordability? That's been talked about a lot in the legislature, and the governor, defines it however he defines it. You have some lawmakers defining it some other ways. How do you define affordability? Like, what for you would make Vermont more affordable?
What would make it more affordable is, I think, one, raising the minimum wage, I think, is one of the most important things. We also have to look at health insurance premiums, because those are incredibly expensive, and a lot of folks worry about, let's say emergency room visits. If they have to they have to balance, should I go to the emergency room and spend thousands of dollars, or should I take the risk and not go to the emergency room? And so I think health insurance is the premiums that we pay, the huge premiums that we pay. That's something that we need to look at. The minimum wage is also needed. Is also something that we need to look at, and affordable housing. And so, when I think of the concept of affordability, I think that if you're a person working a full-time job, you should not have to live in a constant state of fear that one unexpected expense could send you under. That's my definition of affordability in living here.
In Montpelier, when they hand out the committee assignments, do you know what committee you'd like to serve on, if it was left up to you?
If it was left up to me, I would love to serve on the Judiciary Committee. Mm-hmm. It's what I feel is my area of expertise. I've in law enforcement, you're not just surrounded by criminal laws. You're going to family court, you're going to criminal court as well. You're also heavily involved with the state's attorney's office, and as well as folks who are going in and out of prison. And so I think that I would be able to provide a unique perspective to the Judiciary Committee.
What is your approach to problem solving? How do you get everyone who might have very disparate views at the table together to work on a similar problem?
That is a tough question, but so how do you bring people together with different views? Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that you have to do is assume best intentions. I think that when you have a group of people around a table and you're discussing something like, let's say, Act 46, you have to assume that nobody at that table wants children to have a bad education. I don't think there are many people out there like that, but when you're sitting around a table discussing Act 46, people want the same thing generally, but everybody has different strategies on how to approach that goal that they have. And so I think that when you assume best intentions, that's one important aspect of it. The other is trying to put yourself in the perspective or the shoes of the other person, instead of just assuming that somebody wants to be contrary to you. Try to figure out why that person is thinking the way they are.
Another thing roles I think lawmakers play is an interesting one where they have to be leaders, but they're also part of a team. How are you as a leader? How are you as a teammate?
So how would I make that switch if I had to, or how am I as a leader? And
how do you operate as a leader? Like, what are some of your characteristics? But then again, how do you operate as a teammate? Mm-hmm. They're not always exactly the same thing.
I think that when you're in a leadership position, you have to lead by example. That's one of the things that I've learned in law enforcement. And with my dad being prior military, it's one of the things that I've heard throughout my life is if you're a leader, you have to lead by example. So, I would never ask somebody to do something that I'm not willing to do myself. And this is something that I think played itself out pretty well in the campaign that we took on. And leading by example, that's number one. Being accountable for your own actions is number two. And these are all critically important. I'm not listing them in their order of importance, but being accountable, being honest, and not letting your ego get the best of you. Just because you're in a leadership position doesn't mean that you're, God's gift to the world. But you need to put the ego aside sometimes and make sure that you're listening to the people who are following you. And as a teammate, I think the most important skill in that is listening. And again, this also goes back to assuming best intentions. When you're following somebody as a teammate, you have to assume that that leader has your best intentions or has good intentions. And I think those are the important traits as a teammate.
How are you with policy? Like, do you like that process of building policy? Or are you very much more action-oriented and someone else can deal with the fine print?
Can I say both? Because I wish I could say both to that. I do like dealing with the fine print. I mean, I enjoy reading and writing. That's, I'd much rather read and write than, publicly speak or anything like that. I think that's the way it is for most people. They'd rather read a book than speak in front of hundreds of people. But, when it comes to creating the policy, I think I do lean more towards looking at the fine print and any potential loopholes because, I spend a lot of time doing that now in my line of work. Because sometimes you experience bizarre circumstances, and when I say sometimes, I actually mean quite often. We experience some bizarre circumstances where, we have to scratch our heads. We all have to come together as police and say, was a law violated here, or was it not? And sometimes we have very limited time to do that. And so you have to be able to think quickly and, put the pieces together logically and without putting your own emotions into it.
Mm-hmm. So you think you're cut out for committee work for those long hours of hashing out
I think so.
a law?
I think so. I also do like the idea of inspiring people to get out and get active as well.
How about your approach to accomplishing goals?
Can you be a bit more specific? What do you mean, approach to accomplishing goals?
When you have a goal you want to achieve,
Mm-hmm.
in this case, let's say it's a certain piece of legislation you want passed.
Yeah.
How do you approach that? Like, what's your kind of modus operandi?
I think one of the more important things is to defer to people who are experts in a field. So I'm thinking of, let's say, climate change, for example. Let's say, I'm not a climate scientist, but I can acknowledge clearly that we need to approach climate change and deal with the issues that we're facing regarding our environment. However, I'm no expert in that field. But if I had a goal regarding that, I would approach the actual climate scientists, people who have decades of experience, the people who have PhDs, as well as the environmental activists who have devoted their time and energy into studying this topic, and I would consult with them. That's one of the important things when it comes to achieving a goal. Another important thing when attempting to achieve a goal, I think it's just putting in 100% effort. I think that's really what it comes down to. When I started my campaign, I don't like putting in a half-hearted effort into anything. And when I came to the conclusion that I was going to run for office, it was every day putting in the work and just going 100%.
Now, is this the first public office you will have held if you are elected in November?
Yes.
What parts of the rest of your life do you think have prepared you for this role as representative?
What parts of my life? There's quite a bit. I think that, it started from a young age. I grew up in a pretty unique household with, my dad was a political science professor, and my mother was a political activist and was also a nurse. And so there was always political discussion at the dinner table. After that, it was my degree in political science that I earned from Clark University. And after that, it was my role in state government as a state trooper. And so, the philosophical groundwork was set as a child and as a student in my teenage and early adulthood. And then the actual exposure to the issues that are affecting people happened over the last 7 years as a state trooper, where, you're going into homes where people are struggling severely with either opioid use disorder or poverty or a combination of the two. And like I've told many people, it's one thing to read about poverty on a piece of paper, but it's another thing to go into a home and see actual hungry children just up the road from you.
When you were knocking on doors during your campaign and talking to potential constituents, what did you hear the most from people? What were they asking you the most?
People were very concerned about Trump. That was number one. But there was Act 46. There was the opioid issue, race relations as well, and those were the main issues in that order that I heard.
And how did you answer folks when they would ask you these? I mean, Trump is something to talk about, but you don't have much control there.
Yeah, as the representative for Windham 4, there's not much you can really do about the Trump administration, but when it came to that specific topic, I would tell people that, upholding Vermont values and making sure that we stand up to things like bigotry and corruption in politics starts right here at home on the state level. And, I adopt the mindset of, think globally and act locally. Regarding Act 46, there was an overwhelming number of folks who were opposed to merging, and that's generally what I heard when folks wanted to talk about Act 46. Regarding the opioid issue, folks want to see more treatment options, but they're also very concerned about their private property being jeopardized by individuals who may break into their homes in order to finance their addiction.
There's a lot of talk in the press, and I think you and I have even talked about this in previous interviews about Vermont needing to attract more young folks.
Yeah.
And you kind of fit that bill. You fit that framework. What would you say to someone else who's considering moving to Vermont, a young person thinking of starting a family, finding a job? Is it a place that you would say, yes, come? Or
Yes.
would you say, be like, eh?
I would say, yes, come. I would also say that you have to get involved in the community because, the first 6 months to a year that I was living here, I've always lived outside of cities, and coming to this rural lifestyle in my heart, I knew it was what I wanted, but I didn't know how to go about meeting people, and it can get very isolating when you're living literally in the middle of the woods and with barely any internet connection, and you have no idea where people congregate or how to go around meeting people. So I would say the number one thing is get involved in your community if you do decide to move here. The other thing that I think Vermont needs to advertise is our education system. That is one of the reasons that I moved here. And my daughter was only, I think, probably 6 months old when I first moved here. And we have a great education system, and I'd like to see it remain the way it is. And that's, even if you don't have kids, the young folks who may consider moving here, look into what the education system looks like, because they think down the road.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Nader, for all your responses. Anything
Thank you.
You wanted to add, wish I had asked?
No, I think you covered all the bases, but I do just want to say to the people, just hold on to hope and keep getting involved in politics, both on the local level, state level, and federal level.
And if people want to contact you or find out more information, ask you questions, how do they do that?
The number one way is Facebook. I'm very active on Facebook. My website is www.hashimwindham4.com, and the number 4 is not spelled out.
Nader Hashim, thank you for being on the show
Thank you very
today.
much. Appreciate it.